and welcome everyone that's online, and welcome to the folks who decided to attend in person. For those online, you're missing a great lunch, by the way. And we ate early so that hopefully we weren't making you hungry as you watched us eat. So I did first off want to just tell you a little bit about our firm and then a little bit about myself. Lewis, Longman & Walker. We have 5 offices across the state. Jacksonville, West Palm, where we are today, Tampa, St. Petersburg, and Tallahassee. Our firm was founded in 1994, so almost 30 years ago. And ever since that date, we have represented special districts all over the state. And in fact, some of our lawyers were representing districts before our firm was founded in 94, when they were other places. So we have extensive experience representing special districts, both as their lawyers and lobbyists. As for myself, I joined Lewis, Longman & Walker in 2003. So I've been here almost 20 years, and I've been working with special districts since the day I walked in the door. So I really enjoy working with special districts. Primarily, my role is as a legislative lawyer, as a lobbyist, and representing special districts before the state legislature and the agencies in Tallahassee. I decided that this might be a good time to do a presentation like this. As we all know, special districts have been in the news recently with the recent special session addressing a handful of special districts, most notably Reedy Creek improvement districts. Since that time, I've had a lot of phone calls with people having concerns about their own district, what this means for them. Had numerous interviews with reporters looking for folks that knew something about districts. So just felt like this was a good time, that there was a lot of interest right now, and people might have questions and want to know, how does the legislature work from the perspective of a special district? So with that, I'm going to jump into my presentation. It's really a 2-part presentation. The first part will deal with local bills and how a local bill is enacted. And then the second part is something that most districts don't think about as far as the legislature goes, but they should. And that is how the appropriations process works and what opportunities are out there for special districts to get state funding for their projects. So those are the 2 parts of my presentation. As Kelly said, if you have questions, you can feel free during the presentation to type them into the chat. I probably won't be able to see the questions and do my presentation at the same time. So when we get to the end of the presentation, I'll try to answer those questions. And if you don't feel like typing them into the text, into the chat box, if you'll just type in a note that says, I would like to ask a question after the presentation, when we get to that point, Kelly can unmute you and you can actually ask your question live, and I will give it my best shot to answer it. So with that, I'm going to kick it off. So the first thing is, what is a local bill? What is a special act? So when you think about bills that come before the legislature, most folks think about what are known as general bills. And these are bills that apply equally across the state to every geographic area, every person in the state. Special districts, as we know, are a smaller subset of the state, a smaller geographic portion. And so local bills are laws that are passed that affect only a subset of the state, less than the entire population. And they have different requirements than general bills, which is what we're going to go through today. And the rule of thumb is that if your district was created by a special act, the only way that it can be changed is to come back to the legislature and amend it through passing a local bill that, when it is signed into law by the governor, becomes a special act. So that's what we're going to do, is go through that local bill process just so you can familiarize yourself with it in case you ever have the need to seek a change to your special act or to your charter. Reasons why districts seek local bills: over my 20 years, it runs the gamut. Anything from wanting to change the boundaries of the district, whether expanding them or contracting them, Maybe it's changing the manner in which the governing board is elected. We've dealt with things like increasing competitive bid thresholds that were first established 50 years ago. And in order to more be able to operate efficiently, those thresholds need to be raised to something more modern. We've dealt with annexation issues in local bills. A couple times we worked with districts that were created in the early 1900s by a court decree and were given a 99-year lifespan. And these districts were running up against the end of their 99 years and needed to be reestablished. So we've handled bills like that. So the reasons run the gamut, but anytime that you need a change to your special act, if you were created by the legislature, which is how you would have a special act, you need to come back to the legislature to make that change. And so here's where we'll talk about how that process works. This is sort of a bullet list here, and we'll talk a little bit more, and there's some really fancy illustrations that will go with it later. But the first thing that really has to occur is your local delegation must approve the bill. And by local delegation, that is any representative or senator that represents a portion of the county in which your district is located. Sometimes a district overlaps into multiple counties. And in those cases, your local bill would have to be approved by each county delegation that your district touches. So, you know, going back to the district that is at the top of everyone's mind right now, Reedy Creek, it is partially in Orange County and partially in Osceola County. So if there was a local bill for them, both county delegations would have to approve it. Another rule, and that does not apply for general bills. That is just for local bills. The next thing that applies to local bills is you must publish a notice of intent to seek legislation in your local newspaper. And that must be done at least 30 days before your bill can be filed in the legislature. So the publication requirement, again, is special just for local bills. The only way around having to do the publication is if in the local bill itself, it does not become effective, or it only becomes effective with a referendum of the affected residents. So you can get around the publication if you have a referendum in your bill, but otherwise you'll need to publish that at least 30 days prior to the bill being filed. So when you're thinking about a local bill, one of the first things you need to do is to start with the first day of session, which is the bill filing deadline, and then back timeline up from there. So at a minimum, you must have this publication published at least 30 days before the first day of session. You know, my recommendation to folks is publish it as early as you're ready to do it, because each session we have 5 to 6 interim committee weeks where the legislature is in Tallahassee meeting and holding committee meetings where bills can be passed before a session even starts. And so if you get your publication done early, you actually have a chance to begin moving your bill through committee before session actually begins. Local bills, again, a different, distinguished from general bills. Local bills don't have to have a Senate sponsor, unlike a general bill, which must have a House sponsor and a Senate sponsor. Local bills only need a House sponsor unless the district is in more than 2 counties. And if that is the case, then you need both a House sponsor and a Senate sponsor. Most local bills are passed on a single vote by the House and a single vote by the Senate. For those of you at districts that have consent calendars, think of that like this. They put all the local bills on a consent calendar and they vote them all out on one vote. The exception there is if your local bill has something in it that's different than what's in general law, then you cannot be on that consent calendar and you must be voted on. Your bill must be voted on by itself, and it must get a 3/5 vote of both the House and the Senate, unlike the local bills on the local bill calendar, which only need a majority. Then, there's the consent calendar. And then the other rule to really be aware of is once the House sends all of the local bills to the Senate has a rule that any single senator from the delegation that's affected by the local bill can object to the bill and pull it off of the consent calendar. What that effectively means is your bill is dead. If one senator opposes your bill to the extent that they're willing to remove it from the consent calendar, your bill will not be considered unless the Senate agrees to waive the rules, which takes a 2/3 vote of the Senate. And right now, the Republicans don't have a 2/3 majority. So there would have to be some sort of bipartisan agreement to get 2/3 vote to waive the rules to put that bill back on the calendar for consideration. So I say that to tell you that if you have a local bill, you better make sure you have your senator's support, because you get in a real pickle if that bill goes over there and they oppose the bill enough that they're willing to pull it off the consent calendar. So these are some of the things that are specific to local bills that are different than general bills. And I can go back and give an example of what's an exception to a general law. I mentioned earlier that we worked on bills relating to annexation, cities annexing into special districts. There's currently language in chapter, I believe it's 171, that addresses how you transfer services when a city annexes into a district. Well, that process in general law was not working for this district. So we passed a local bill that had a unique way to handle these annexations that was different than chapter 171, which is general law. And so therefore, it could not be on the consent calendar. It had to be considered by itself and be voted out with a 3/5 vote. We also have, we've dealt with that Senate rule I mentioned where, one single senator can pull a bill from consideration. We represented a district in Broward County that wanted to make some rather innocuous changes to their charter. But there was one specific senator who had a beef, if you will, with some members of the governing board, and decided to take out her frustration on the district and pulled that bill from consideration. So we've dealt with all of this in the past. So these are some special things just to think about, unique requirements to local bills. And here's where I get into the really fancy artwork. And this is just sort of an illustration of this process and how it would work. Why are special districts created? Generally, it's because citizens identify some service or infrastructure that's needed in their area. And apparently in this particular area, there must be a lot of flooding because the person is standing on a box on top of water and fish. So the first thing they do is the residents go to the county or city and say, can you please help us? We are flooding out here in Mildew Acres. And for whatever reason, sometimes the county, or if you're in the city, doesn't want to provide the service or infrastructure, or other times they're just not capable of providing it. So from there, the residents of Mildew Acres, as we mentioned, they go to their local legislative delegation and ask for help. This is where they say, we're willing to tax ourselves for better flood protection. Can you please help us? So that's, again, the first step is getting that delegation approval. I typically recommend that you have gotten the agreement of at least a House member from your district that would agree to sponsor the bill before you go to delegation, so that you have a champion on the delegation for your issue. But that's the first step in the process, is for that delegation to approve that bill. And they've all agreed to pass a bill to create the Mildew Acres Water Control District. Again, as we mentioned, you have to publish notice in the local newspaper of general circulation. It must be done at least 30 days prior to the bill being filed in the legislature. Again, and the only exception there is unless your local bill contains a referendum. A little curious note for those of you that aren't familiar with Florida's legislative process: House bills get odd numbers and Senate bills get even numbers. So as I mentioned here, most local bills only have a House sponsor. So in this case, we have House Bill number 1. These slides were drawn some years ago. These days, the House reserves about the first, well, I guess 1 through about 21, as far as bill numbers, in recent years have been reserved for priority issues of House leadership. So it would be a rare thing for a local bill to get a House Bill number 1. But for purposes of illustration here, you see it's an odd number. So it must be filed prior to the beginning of session. This year's session begins March 7th. So you got to have it filed by then. So again, back up all your dates from there. But also, again, the earlier you get it filed, the better chances you have. Once a bill is filed, then the speaker, for every bill, this is not unique to local bills, assigns each bill to committees. And in order for your bill to pass, you must be voted favorably through all of your referenced committees. In recent years, most local bills, I would say, average 3 committee hearings. Maybe a rare one gets 2, but 2 or 3 committees is about the average for a local bill. And, you know, session is only 9 weeks long, and most committees in the House stop meeting about the subcommittees stop meeting around week 4 or 5, and then the main committees stop meeting week 7. So, you know, do your math. If you have 3 committee references, you really have to get that ball moving and keep it moving, or you quickly run out of time. So if you've not been heard in that first committee by week probably 5, you can pretty much chalk your bill up as dead. The first bill or the first committee that all local bills go to is the local government committee. The name of that committee changes every 2 years. The incoming speaker creates what committees he or she wants to have, and then appoints chairman and members of each committee. And the names of those committees sometimes change. I think right now the name of the local government committee is the Local and Veterans Affairs Subcommittee. In the past, it's been called the Local and Federal Affairs. I think at one point there was a Local Administration Committee. So it can change. The incoming speaker, Paul Renner, has not yet made his committee announcements. That will occur after the election in November. So that committee name could change, but the local government committee is where local bills are almost always referred first. And that's the committee that really does the deep dive on every local bill. And that is the committee where you must spend the majority of your time. If you can convince that committee staff and that committee chair that your local bill is a good bill and there's no issues with it, the chances of your bill making it all the way to the finish line greatly improve. That's the committee where local bills are weeded out. So that's where to really concentrate your efforts. And then once you can get through that committee, then that's where I talked about trying to keep that ball rolling and get it through the rest of your committees. This is one thing that we do as lobbyists. We do a lot of begging and literally going to the committee chairman, explaining your bill and why he or she should put it on their agenda. And here you see the committee chairman asking the political registrations of the Mildew Acre residents. But that's one of the things we do is try to get our bills put on the agendas. If you don't make those agendas, you can't pass from those committees. And as I said, you have to pass from all committees to make it to the finish line. So that's, assuming you're successful with the chairman, the bill is placed on the agenda. And what we do is we try to meet with every member of that committee to make sure they're okay with our bill. In the past, legislators would defer to members from the area. So, if someone on the committee is from Duval County and the local bill was sponsored from someone from Escambia County, the folks from Duval would defer. They said, listen, that's not my area. You know it better. I'm going to defer to you. I will say in this day and age, you can't take that for granted anymore. You need to work every member of that committee. You need to work every member of every committee to make sure that there is minimal to no opposition to your bill. Assuming you've done your job there, the committee will approve your bill. And then assuming you've kept that ball rolling and passed through the rest of your committees, as I mentioned, the bill goes on to the local bill calendar in the full House, where they all vote House Bill 1 out favorably. At that point, again, the bill goes to the Senate, where it's referred to the Senate Rules Committee. And almost always, with very few exceptions, the Senate Rules Committee then puts those local bills onto the Senate local bill calendar. There can, though, be the opportunity for that bill to be referred to a committee or actually be heard in the Senate Rules Committee. Typically, that doesn't happen. Typically, they go straight on the local bill calendar in the Senate, unless, as I mentioned, a senator from the delegation opposes the bill and removes the bill from the calendar. Assuming that the Senate passes House Bill 1, it's then engrossed, enrolled, and sent to the governor. And once presented to the governor, he or she has 15 days to veto the bill, or else it becomes law without signature. If a local bill happens to go to the governor during session, that timeline shrinks to 7 days. I guess the idea there being if it's important enough that the bill is sent mid-session, then we need to hurry up and get a decision on this bill. So most local bills, 15 days. In a rare exception, if sent during session, it would be 7 days. Some things to, fundamentals here for if your district's going to be seeking a local bill. As I mentioned, get to know all of your local legislative delegation. There's the House website and the Senate website, and you can go on either one of those and find district maps. You can plug in specific addresses and find out who represents a specific area. But you need to know everybody on your local delegation. One of the bonuses for the folks that attended here in person is I actually gave them a copy of the Know Your Legislator Advisor book, so they can skip the step of having to go to the website. But that's where you go to find out who's on your delegation. I always recommend that you reach out to these members, even if you're not seeking a local bill. Reach out to them and make sure they know what your district is, what it does. I think it's a great idea to invite them out to see your district, to drive around it, to see the facilities. The more they know you, the better off you're going to be in the long run. And I recommend you do this in the off season. And again, session this year will be March and April. The last session in early 2022 was January and February. If you try to do meetings like this during session, you will not have any success. You need to build these relationships before you need them in Tallahassee, because their time is so compressed when they're there that it's just very difficult to get their attention. So, in the off season, reach out to these folks, make sure they know who you are, what you do, show them around. It's my recommendation. And to do that, whether you need a local bill or not, that should be part of your annual educational mission, if you will. Well, there you go. Invite them for a facility tour. If you have a specific interest in a legislator and, you really believe in who they are and what they do, you can't do this on behalf of the district, but, personally, if you really support someone, you can reach out to their campaign office and ask, are there opportunities for you to help on their campaign? Most every candidate will hold walking events where you can volunteer to go literally knock door to door and tell folks that you support this candidate and that you suggest they support them too. Of course, they're always willing to take a campaign contribution from you. You can do that, but again, that all has to be done in your personal capacity and not in your district capacity, whether you be an employee or sit on the board. But those are great ways to build relationships with legislators. We do a lot of that. We've put a lot of I've personally put a lot of shoe leather in over the years, walking in every corner of this state, door to door for folks trying to get the message out about their campaign. So that's a great way to build relationships with these legislators. So, when I talked about getting started early, here, start talking with your representatives 5 to 6 months prior to the beginning of session, as early as you can. Again, you back all those dates up. You've got to have a delegation meeting and have it approved there. You have to have publication. So the earlier you can get started, the better. But I would suggest as a, sort of a benchmark, 5 to 6 months before session. So if session's in March, what's that, July, maybe next month, maybe start talking to folks about what you need as far as a local bill. Again, just like when a bill goes to a committee, we try to work every member of that committee. We recommend that at the delegation meeting level, you try to work every member of that delegation. In some counties, it's easy. I think, for instance, maybe Indian River County only has 2 legislators. It's 1 senator and 1 representative. Palm Beach County, where we are today, it's probably a little more difficult. There's probably 10 or 11. I'd have to look in my book, but I would guess there's probably 10 or 11 members on that delegation. So in a large urban county, you have more folks to get to, but I highly recommend that you try to meet with every one of them before that delegation meeting to try to answer each and every one of their questions they may have about your bill. We talked about committee referrals. Again, the fewer the better. Everything is compressed during session, and the less hoops you have to jump through, the fewer hoops you have to jump through, the better. We talked about working staff. They are really important. They're the ones who oftentimes, these are who the chairman of each committee rely on. And if the staff director that's assigned to your local bill has an issue with your bill, it will be very difficult for your bill to make it through the process. So you have to work staff. You also have to work, as I said, the elected officials. One of the things that we do is we maintain relationships with these legislative staffers as part of our job. And so, it's almost equally as important to be able to get staff on your side as it is to the legislators. Here are some interesting local bill stats. Maybe they're not interesting, but this is from last session, just to kind of give you an idea of how many bills were out there. 46 total bills filed. 21 of those related to independent districts. The other, 25, probably related to cities or counties or some other form of local government. I kind of did a look through, we talked about reasons districts seek local bills. The majority of them were to modify their charters. 15 of those in some way modified their charters. 5 of them actually created new special districts, and 1 dissolved an existing district. I believe that was one where 1 small independent fire district was being merged into a neighboring larger independent fire district. So, the service didn't really go away. It just merged with a larger district. So of those 21, 17 passed, so about an 80% survival rate. And just as a note, I put on there that of those 17 that passed, 15 had hired a lobbying firm to represent them. And you see the percentages there, how that works out. So not saying you have to have a lobbyist, but I think it increases your chances of passing. So the second topic that we were going to talk about was appropriations in the budget process. And, my thoughts on this is that historically, I don't think districts thought about seeking funding from the legislature. That's begun to change in recent years, and we have begun seeing more districts seeking these budget items. And these can be for any number of projects. They can be for water projects, whether that is, drainage or drinking water or wastewater. It can be any number of things. It could be fire districts looking for a new fire, help with funding a new fire station or buying a new piece of equipment. It could be for virtually anything. And I just think that historically districts didn't think about this opportunity. Cities and counties absolutely have been thinking about this, and is a primary reason why a lot of those type of local governments hire lobbying firms, is to try to, bring home the bacon, if you will. So, we'd like to encourage you all to think about, where could you use some help from the state? What type of projects do you have out there in your long-term plans that, with a little bit of work and investment on your part, you might be able to save your local taxpayers some money by receiving some state help there. So the only bill that the legislature is required to pass each year is the budget. And the Constitution requires that that budget be balanced. We can't go into debt here in Florida. Unlike your district's fiscal year, which begins October 1st, the state's fiscal year begins on July 1st of each year. And then just to give you a sense of the scope of the state budget, this year it was a record $112.1 billion. That was up about $12 billion from last year's budget. So the reasons for that, by the way, I think it was primarily federal stimulus money coming down, but the state economy actually boomed last year, and actually even through this week, the estimates are still going up. So the state economy has been good. As a sense for how the budget's developed, the first step in the process each year is each agency must submit its budget recommendations to the legislature. I have here by October, that used to be the standard when session always began in March. However, in recent years, session is in the even numbered years, session begins in January. So that date actually backs up to September for an early session, October for a March session. And then the next step in that process is at least 30 days before session begins, the governor submits his recommendations to the legislature. And then once they have the agency recommendations and the governor's recommendations, the House and Senate begin independently crafting their own budgets. And then ultimately, about week 4 or 5 each session, each chamber passes its budget. And then once each chamber has passed its budget, and of course, these are 500-page documents, there's lots of differences between the two. So to negotiate out those differences between the House and Senate budget, the leadership of the House appoints conference committees to try to address the differences and come up with one unified budget, which then ultimately has to go back to the House and Senate and be passed by each before being sent to the governor for approval. And just like with local bills or general bills for that matter, the governor has 15 days to approve the budget. The difference here is in the budget, the governor has line item veto authority, which means he can veto one line of funding in the 500+ page budget, as opposed to a general bill or a local bill. The governor has to veto the whole thing. He cannot just veto a portion of a bill. So curious timing. Actually, today, the budget was sent to the governor. This year's budget was sent to the governor. I expect he will act on it probably by the end of the day, even though he has 15 days. This governor, the way he's been operating is he has been either approving or vetoing bills within a day or two of them being sent to him. So he already knows what he's going to do in this budget. And I would expect by close of business today or perhaps tomorrow, we'll know what all is in the next year's coming budget. And I know this is a little small, but I wanted to squeeze it onto one page. Again, these are some sort of statistics for you. There are some different rules between the House and the Senate about seeking appropriations projects for a special district, or a county, for a city, whatever. In the House, going back about 6 years ago, the House began requiring any appropriation request be filed as a standalone bill. So you have to meet that same bill filing deadline we talked about earlier, the first day of session. You have to find yourself a bill sponsor for your appropriation request. And then the House has some rules. It must actually be sent, must pass favorably through at least one committee for the House to consider it for funding. But you have to have it filed as a standalone bill in the House. This year, just to give you a sense of how many, 1,729 appropriations projects were filed this year. I skimmed through those, and when I told you that most districts don't think about it, but cities and counties are, only 13 of those 1,700 plus appropriations projects were requested by special districts. So there's a lot of competition out there, but there's still opportunity. And I went through the budget to try to identify those special district projects that were funded this year. As you see here, there were at least 7 that were funded, projects for independent special districts, totaling about $10 million. You see there, leading the list was a little over $4 million for the Lehigh Acres Municipal Services Improvement District, a client I actually represented, this firm represents. So that was a big success for us. You see some others there. Those were all water projects. As I mentioned, other opportunities include local government fire service. You see there a new fire station, station and training ground, a new ladder truck. And we also represented the Ocean City Wright Fire Control District there. So we were successful this year bringing home about $5 million for 2 of our special district clients. And you notice there where I put asterisks by the ones that appeared to have hired lobbyists, 1, 2, 3, 4 of the 7. So does hiring a lobbyist improve your chances? Well, it didn't greatly appear to improve. 6 out of the 13 of those 13 that were filed, 6 of those hired lobbyists. So that's 46%. It increases to 57% of those that were successful, 4 of those 7. I thought the interesting stat was who brought home the most money, and 81% of the dollars that were brought down were represented by lobbyists. So can you be successful without hiring lobbyists? Absolutely. Do I think it helps your chances? I do. And I think it helps you be more successful if you actually get your project funded to be able to get maximum funding for that project. So I'm going to wrap it up here with a little slide that I tend to laugh at. What society thinks I do as a lobbyist, smoking big cigars and lighting them with $20 bills. What my mom thinks I do, what politicians think I do, that is for sure true. The requests never stop for campaign contributions. What clients think I do, what I think I do, and then what I really do. And I mentioned keeping the ball rolling. Most of the time, it's keeping that ball rolling up the hill. So anyway, I hope you all found the presentation helpful. We're always willing to sit down and talk with any of you if you have any legislative needs, whether it be a local bill, whether it be an appropriations request for some project you might have. As I mentioned, we also provide legal services to districts throughout the state. We're always happy to sit down and chat. No charge for additional consultations to see, how can we help your district. There's my contact information. If anyone has questions or would like to talk, I'd be happy to speak with you. And if it's not me that can assist you, I'm sure I can find somebody in one of our other offices and can make that connection for you. So with that, Kelly, do we have anybody that had typed a question into the chat, or does anybody have a question that they'd like to ask live?
So as of right now, the couple questions that we are receiving are about if we can get a copy of the presentation, and the answer is yes. I will be sending out a copy of the PowerPoint slides and the recording later on this afternoon. And I don't see any other questions at this time, but we'll give people maybe a minute or so if anyone has anything that they'd like to submit, or feel free just to, like what Chris said, speak up if you have a question at this time.
Yeah, and of course, there's my email, there's my phone number. If you're too shy to type it in the chat, if you think it's a dumb question and don't want to type it or speak it out loud, feel free to email me or call me. I'll keep your dumb question confidential, but I'll be happy to speak with you. And like I said, if I can't assist, we have lots of great lawyers around this firm, around the state, that we can connect you with and to try to help your district be as successful as it can be.
I have a dumb question, Chris.
Okay. Dumb question from the in-person audience.
How is the local delegation selected? There were 12 from Palm Beach County, for example.
Well, the way the delegation is selected is by the voters. So any legislator, House of Representatives or Senate, anybody that represents a portion of Palm Beach County is on the Palm Beach County.
So they are, okay, they are automatic.
Every legislator that represents a portion of this county is on that delegation.
Okay.
And there are some legislators, particularly senators, who span multiple counties. And so they may, and especially when you get up into the panhandle, the less urbanized areas, there's some senators that represent 8 or 9 counties, and they have to go to 8 or 9 different delegation meetings to, and there's more than just local bill consideration that's done at delegation meetings. If you've ever attended one, typically all of the constitutional officers will be there and give the delegation an update on their office. There will be typically any of the city or county governments in the area will send somebody to kind of update the delegation on what they're doing or any legislative asks they may have. And then there's also always an opportunity for the public to speak to their elected officials. And that can range from anything from individuals who just have a personal issue that they'd like to bring before the delegation, to nonprofit groups that want to tell the delegation about what they do. It might be nonprofit groups that are seeking a legislative appropriation and they're wanting to get the buy-in from the delegation. So it's more than just legislation. That's the time for the local community to address their delegation. Some county delegations hold multiple meetings. I believe Palm Beach County holds multiple. I know Broward does. I know Pinellas does. So some of the larger counties will hold multiple meetings. Some will have special meetings just for any local bills that might be considered that year. But the smaller counties will typically just have one where they'll consider everything, hear from the community one time.
Okay.
Chris, if I just can add something, I know here in Palm Beach County, probably the larger counties, maybe all counties, the legislative delegation has a staff. So there's like a staff director here who like coordinates all the activity of the local delegation. And sometimes that's the best person to get to if you want to get to the whole group.
Yeah, so not all delegations have a secretary or an executive director, it might be called. Your more populous counties do. Your smaller counties typically don't. You'll just have one of the legislative aides. I mentioned Indian River County only has 2 legislators. Typically what'll happen there is they'll rotate who is chair of the delegation with only 2. They just rotate each year, and whoever's turn it is, their staff will serve as the organizer for the meeting. Each delegation has its own rules. So, make sure if you're seeking a local bill, or for that matter, if you want to bring an appropriation request before the delegation, that you get in touch with either the delegation secretary or the chair of the delegation and find out what specific rules there are. There's usually timelines, deadlines for submitting documentation or written information that you want to be distributed to the delegation. They almost all have special rules for local bills. Many of them require a hard copy for each member of the delegation. Many of them require that there are some forms that the House requires accompany each local bill. Some of the delegation requires you fill those forms out ahead of time and submit them with your package to the delegation. So, before you go to delegation, you need to check with with the delegation chair or with the delegation secretary to find out what rules are relevant to whatever issue you're seeking. And if you don't know who your delegation chair is or who your delegation secretary is, you can call any member of the delegation's office and they'll put you in contact with the right person.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So I just need some clarification. We get grants. We have grant writing people. What's the difference between a grant for a project versus a local bill for a project?
Sure.
Who initiates it? Would it be staff? Would it be the elected board or a collaboration?
Sure. So grants are, and you know, let's just talk about state grant funding at this point. Those are typically done. So in that case, the legislature will have appropriated a pot of money to an agency, let's say DEP for this particular conversation, for a particular purpose. Maybe it's septic to sewer conversion. And DEP will set up a ranking process and it will solicit projects from anybody that's interested in doing a septic to sewer conversion. And then DEP is given the authority to rank those projects and fund those projects up to the amount the legislature has budgeted for that for that purpose. These, what I'm talking about, are different. This is the legislature itself saying, I want this one individual septic to sewer project funded. And it's separate and outside of that pot of money. There's no ranking involved. It is the legislature directly funding something it wants to fund. So you can do both. You know, you can try for grant funding through one and seek an appropriation, a direct appropriation from the legislature for the same project. And, you know, if you get the appropriation, then you can withdraw your application from the grant funding. But that's the difference in seeking a grant versus seeking a direct appropriation from the legislature.
Thank you.
Sure. All right. Seeing no more questions in the room. Seeing no more questions online, Kelly?
Nope, no more questions online.
Well, I want to thank again everyone that attended, whether in person or remotely. And again, if you have any questions or just want to chat about what's going on in your district, feel free to reach out and give me a call or shoot me an email. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone. I'll be sending a copy of this presentation, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.